I was always hopeful that I could learn how to express and pass along the message of liberty. I think if you did a poll, that you'd find out that there are a lot more than the majority support this idea that you shouldn't lie, cheat, steal, and kill people. And why is it that we tolerate that? I always ask, if this is true and we all tend to agree with this, why do we allow our government to do it?
Hey everyone, we are live with Dr. Ron Paul. I'm Kevin from Meditation Magazine, and today we're going to have a conversation about hope and what we hope for the future. I want to also just let people know Ron Paul, most of you may be familiar with him as the three-time presidential candidate for the Libertarian Party and the Republican Party. He inspired a grassroots movement toward liberty in this country, like none that I think that we've seen in our lifetimes. I want to also mention that Ron Paul goes live on Rumble every 11 a.m. Monday through Friday for the Liberty Report. So if anybody's interested in watching Ron Paul talk about liberty and the future and hope and what we can do to make this world a better place, then definitely check that out. I also I want to just thank you for being here, Ron Paul, Dr. Paul. I know your time is so valuable, and I just want to say thank you so much for being here.
Good. Nice to be with you.
Yeah. So I also want to acknowledge Christina Tobin, who set this interview up. She's a mutual friend of ours. She runs the Free and Equal Foundation, and she runs the debates for the third parties like the Libertarians and the Greens and all those people. And she said, Christina told me, Ron, that you inspired her to start Free and Equal and the United We Stand tour when you said the following quote: "If you ever can bring about revolutionary changes, two things would be required. Young people would have to be involved, and you would need music." So she took that and she ran with it, and she now runs this movement where they have these wonderful events and parties and festivals, all for liberty and freedom and just a wonderful movement of the young people and the music. So
That's
thank you
great.
so much for inspiring that.
Very good. Thank
Yeah.
you.
You're welcome. So this issue, the upcoming issue of Meditation Magazine, is going to be about hope. And you really ran on hope when you ran, especially your original campaigns was very much. It was actually called Hope for America. I think that was your slogan that was on the buttons that people wore on their shirts and on your bumper stickers and everything like that. And I want to ask you this. This is something that we're asking each person that we interview for this issue. What is your most hopeful future? What would you love to see for our country and our world?
Well, hope is very important. And you mentioned that it was mentioned in the first, I guess, presidential race. And that was, people think, well, you're running a race. You hope you win. But that didn't cross my mind because the first time I ran for office, it was sort of on a lark, and it was just sort of a place where I could express myself. And that was way back in 1974, 76 when I first got involved. But my hope was that not to be elected. That was very, very secondary. My wife said, that was her biggest worry. She
Hmm.
says, "If you run, you're going to get elected." I said, "No, no, no." But I was always hopeful that I could learn how to express and pass along the message of liberty. And I was influenced by Leonard Reed at the Foundation for Economic Education. I got fascinated with monetary policy and economic policy, and that led really to my understanding that is such an important issue because it involves everything,
Hmm.
because they're dealing with the unit of account that everybody deals with every single day, dozens and dozens of times. And whether you're involved in foreign policy or domestic policy or whatever, or protecting a person's budget, you have to understand the economic importance of money. So in reality, that is studying the whole issue of liberty. And that's where I think people come up short. And of course, with a libertarian influence that I've had, is that if people could just give up violence to try to have their own way, it would go a long way. Natural law teaches that to, and it's been around for a long time, thousands of years, and regardless of religious activity over those many years, they they weren't they emphasize it differently and maybe to degrees, but most people believe, even today, I bet you most of the people in this country, regardless of what they do, and maybe if we think they're not doing the right thing, is the natural law is that it is a natural thing to believe that we shouldn't lie, we shouldn't cheat, we shouldn't kill, and we should do what we do, live up to our promises. And the
Mm.
world would be better off. It would be one that I think, if you understand that, if your goal is peace and prosperity, you have to understand the importance of understanding that we no lies, cheating, stealing, or killing. And that to me is very important.
So that's wonderful. I hear a beautiful vision of the future, in sound monetary policy, people following natural law. But what would that look like in practice for, let's say, the average American family? Imagine this future actually comes to pass, right? So let's say in 10 years somehow we had the Ron Paul revolution, and we now are living in this free society. What does that look like in terms of, is there government functioning? Is there very limited government functioning? What does it look like for the average family, average person living in America?
Well, unfortunately, we haven't had enough examples of what it might be like, but I think it would be, much more prosperous. People would get along. There's been libertarian-leaning societies where different religions and different races got along quite well until governments got involved, and I think people can't. Come to these conclusions if they think, well, what we need is just another person, in Congress, and they'll bring this about. I went to Congress and spent time, but it wasn't there to become chairman of the Federal Reserve Board. It was there as a podium that I had, and, and that means that we have a responsibility, to learn and understand this. But if you were looking for peace and prosperity, which has never been achieved fully, it has to be, a degree. Right now, we had a little boost on some of the issues in the last election, but so far we've seen some shortcomings. It's difficult. So there's a lot of hope there. And with the world as it is today, too, I'm hopeful that homeschooling and private schooling and individual curiosity will solve the problem of lack of a good education. But I think if anybody wants to really understand that issue, they ought to look and see how the founders were educated. It was unbelievable how educated they were, and to help bring about the ideas. And they were strong believers in natural law too. But if even if one individual, some people say to me, Ron, well, what we need is you at the Federal Reserve System, and you'll straighten it out. It's not that easy because it's ingrained in people. It's taught to them for 100 years, and we've endorsed this whole idea through progressive education. And people have to understand is the fact that they've taken over education that we end up with 99% of the people that go to Washington endorse the Federal Reserve System, which is a powerful instrument that is moving our country in the opposite direction and putting more responsibility on individuals and their freedom to do what they think is best.
Okay, yeah, I would like to get into the Federal Reserve and economics in a few minutes, but first, I just like to wrap up this theme of hope. Um, do you, after all this time that you've been being an activist and a politician and seeing very little change, do you still have hope that we can see your vision of the future come to reality in the near future or in the distant future?
Well, for me, if I didn't have that hope and anticipation of what we're working for, I'd be very unhappy. No,
Mm.
I see it all the time because I had a little birthday party the other day, and we had
Happy
quite a few
birthday.
people. Thank you. But if
Mm.
we had a lot of people come out, and I thought, well, they didn't come to see me. Some would claim they did, but they came because we gathered together because we
in the
generally
educational
agree with
system.
the
The
idea of
use of the
liberty is
internet, the
far
use of
superior to
what we're doing now,
authoritarianism.
talking and reaching
And
people. If people your
my
program
bias
always
always
is,
is
I don't
when you
know it
come
well enough to
together
know how many
and
people watch it,
and
but
you have a
there's probably a
rally.
lot more than
Anytime
you
we have
know.
rallies and all during the campaign, I said
I
you
was
should have a good
dumbfounded
time
by speaking
with
out.
it
You know, I
because it's
started
awful
speaking out when
boring,
I thought I
and
was
you don't
grasping
know
the issue
the consequence
of
will be because
freedom,
history
how many.
history
I'd go
shows
to a
that a lot of people
university
understood
and
and
have a
promoted. There have been societies that were much freer than others, but I'm hopeful now that I think the group that we're interested in, I'd get 15 or 20 people out. I said, fine. And and they were enthusiastic, and some of them stayed with the ideas and ended up doing things themselves. So I still am, in bewilderment. When the rallies came out and the people came out, and I was, sort of, where did they come from? Because I didn't see myself in that manner. I saw myself as better understanding why liberty is so far superior, and it fit into my personal religious views too, on how we should treat other people.
Oh, okay. So does religion factor in your views about liberty? And do you have any practices that you use, for example, prayer or meditation or anything that enforces these and helps you maintain your hope?
Well, personally, it does. It does, but I don't. I, I I really don't go out and preach to people what I have, what my deeply held religious beliefs are. But it's amazing to me that I talk in the tone that we're talking here today on the importance of nonviolence and getting along with being hopeful and uh, and, and getting along with people. And yet I'm still surprised that when we started getting those rallies in 2008 and 2012. I walk into a stadium and I really, truly was dumbfounded. I said, where did these people come from? But I think there's a lot more optimism that I see because I think most people, if in general terms of what we're talking about, I think if you did a poll, uh, that you'd find out that there are a lot more than the majority support this idea that you shouldn't lie, cheat, steal, and kill people. And why is it that we tolerate that? I always add, if this is true and we all tend to agree with this, why do we allow our government to do it? If
Mm.
we can't kill people, why do we tolerate our governments getting involved in so many illegal wars? So
Yeah.
that's a dilemma. But I think our numbers are growing. I think education wise, when I went to Congress in the 70s, nobody ever heard of Austrian economics.
Mm.
Nobody cared much about the foreign about monetary policy and the Federal Reserve. Just think of today, the Federal Reserve is in the daily news almost every day. And but there's some sorting out, and some people are just trying to protect their interests and control over that. But it's an
Yeah.
important issue. But at least it's an issue, and
Mm.
I think one thing that I work on in education is try to convince people that I've had people over the years when they're concerned about inflation and prices are going up, and they'll come and say, well, these prices are going up and they're killing us. And what are you going to, and I'll ask them, what do you think we should do? They said, send us more money. And
Mm.
I said, no, that isn't exactly right. You have to think more in terms of how can you make this monetary system honest as the founders directed us to do.
Yeah, yeah. I want to get into more about the Fed and the economics in a moment, but you had brought up the issue of authoritarianism and versus liberty. I think they're really at odds with one another, and I want to dive into a little bit about what you're feeling hopeful about and what you're feeling maybe worrying in the current Trump administration. Do you see any hopeful trends? Do you see any worrisome trends? What are you thinking right now?
Well, it's getting harder and harder to work to come out with a positive statement during our programming. But they're there, and I think if you take the efforts at the beginning when they talked about USAID, I learned from that because it was worse than I thought. You know, it's
Mm.
stealing money, and in terms the opposition will tell all the good that things those kind of things do, and others are. I try to point out that we're responsible, individual responsibility, whether it's fighting needless wars or doing things that money is taken. So I put it in terms that if you and I can't steal from other people, we don't say, well, you know, we're good people and we're going to have them go to our church. Let's round them up and put them in our church. And it's absolutely the opposite of what I'm talking about. And yet they I think our numbers are still growing education wise. I think there's a lot more interest in personal liberty, but it's still a long way to go. But I'm not unrealistic, and I know there's a lot of roadblocks. For instance, you know, even with what was going on with USAID, no money is cut yet, has been cut yet. So I worry
Mm.
about the ability of those individuals who are in, in an exact opposite of what we're talking about because they're so embedded into the system. And but I still remain optimistic that our numbers are growing. I believe
Mm.
in a remnant that holds things together. I believe that group of people, the remnant who know and understand what freedom is all about, I think and believe sincerely that our numbers are growing.
Yes. So one of the things that you mentioned that you're hopeful about, it seems like you're hopeful about the Doge initiative or the cutting costs initiative to help hopefully reduce the national debt and things like that. It seems, and we'll get into that in a moment. But you mentioned also USAID, and I actually saw in a recent interview you were talking to someone. You said that Doge, I guess Elon and his team had asked you for advice about what to cut, and you had start with, get rid of all the foreign aid, right? And a USAID may have been one of them. I'm not sure if you specifically thought that the U.S. Institute of Peace would be a good one to cut. I know you're a very big advocate for peace on Earth, and I just wanted to find out from you: do you think that it was good for them to cut, for example, the U.S. Institute of Peace, um, even if that may have prevented conflicts and wars in the future?
See, the opposition will have organizations. They take our tax money. We're going to promote peace and prosperity. We'll be the policeman, but we'll be a good policeman of the world. And a lot of them believe it. A lot of the supporters believe it. But the whole thing is, they have to go back one step. Where's the money coming from? And I think the American people are so generous. You know, you could read a story almost every day or every week, every month of some hurricanes happening and people uh, having a disaster to face. And the people rally, and still there's a lot of wealth in the country. So I think that is alive and well. But I always remind people now that we're facing these financial problems, everything that the government does is literally done with stolen money. So that see they base the assumption on the income tax, and that means that if you earn $1,000, the government owns that $1,000, and the government gives you permission on how you can spend it and what you can spend it on. So they control it. And the so I think we have lost this issue of sovereignty. And my religious beliefs are that we have a responsibility for our personal sovereignty, whether it's in the practical here day sense and symbol as much as it is as a long term reaction. It is there, and that I think is so important. That's where I think we are making progress. But if we, I deal to say you have to be realistic. So when people say, "Well, we want you as a chairman of the Federal Reserve," well, it's so bad. If you cut off, I would if I had a magic wand, I wouldn't just say get go get rid of the Federal Reserve tomorrow because it's so ingrained that there's going to be a reaction there that would probably cause a civil war because
Mm.
the moneyed interests are buying for this and they're the ones who benefit from it. And so the argument will be very strong that you're not doing much good. So I see what I'm talking about as being a very personal thing on an individual basis. And that is what I believe, and I frequently use the quote that if an idea whose time has come, it can't be stopped even with guns and weapons. And I think that's what's happening now. There is some new thinking or a renewed effort to practice the principle of personal liberty and personal responsibility, and also to have responsibility not only for oneself, but for our families, our friends, and doing what we can to help our neighbors.
Yeah, thank you. Do you think that the Trump administration generally wants to promote those principles of personal liberty? Do you think that that's do you think that that's a big part of their agenda?
The truth is, I don't have the biggest idea. Some days I
Mm.
get confused. Uh,
Yeah.
but if I'm confused, I can't figure out what their motivations are. I try to give them the benefit of the doubt.
Mm.
But no, he hasn't erased one of my assumptions is once a government program comes along and they're going to do some good for me, I'm very reluctant to say, you sure sounds like a good idea. I'm glad they're having it. I'll be glad to pay my taxes. No, I start with saying they're going to fib to me and just think of how they get us into wars. It's always a lie they're told. And we're told, and the people go along with it. They have to scare the people. And
Mm.
then they want to run our lives. And just think of how they ran our lives or tried to run the lives in COVID. That was a horror. And yet the people have reacted to it, and there's a lot less support for that kind of nonsense now. So I think we are moving in the right direction, but it will not be without some pain and suffering into
Mm.
making the transition away from
Yes.
it.
So I know you were concerned about authoritarianism in the COVID response and the public health response in terms of, the masks and the mandates for the vaccines and things like that. But I wonder if you have any worries about authoritarianism currently in this current administration. And I can tell you, I mean, when I see the military in the streets in DC and Chicago, ICE with masks and no IDs, deportations with no due process, the consolidation of the power in the executive branch, defying the courts, suing the media, weaponizing the Department of Justice, and deporting political activists who speak out against what's going on in Gaza, and all that type of stuff. I see. I worry about rising authoritarianism. I worry about maybe a new Putin who maybe will be in power for a long time. Do you have these types of worries too?
Yeah, I think so. And we might have a bigger worry than when you have a president of the type that we just had before, Biden, uh, because he was in a way ineffective. And yeah,
Mm.
with the current administration and the strong personality of Trump, I think there's more to be concerned about. The intrusions now into the private sector, such as buying up, companies and getting involved. And we've had a corporatism for a long time, but when he starts, controlling so much with tariffs and sanctions and threats and all this. This is an authoritarian that's getting, dangerous, and I think that's a real problem. But most of the time, some good can be found in it because when Daniel and I do our programs, we'll be reporting on something that was pretty bad, and let's say we were talking about COVID and how terrible the government has been in regulating personal liberty. And I say, well, Daniel, let's look at it this way. Maybe today we had 50,000 people change their minds about the government. They shouldn't trust the government, and maybe they'll look in our direction. But it is a major task, to shift those views. But I think one example I use is there's a little bit more justification for saying sending in troops to Washington D.C., but I don't think enough to do what is happening now, where the troops. But I see the danger almost. What if he's really successful? In Washington D.C., looks pretty nice after 1 year. People say, "Well, boy, we want our troops in our city." So they're already talking about send the troops to Chicago, send the troops to Baltimore, and that I think is not a good idea. But I don't think it's going to be a golden era. Even in Washington D.C., you hear the reports and they sound real good, but the cheerleader is really good at cheering this on and saying, "Look at what we did here. We're going to do it elsewhere." But I think the movement of troops is a big issue, and whether they're there, whether we worry about it in the Middle East or Ukraine or you Afghanistan or on and on, Vietnam, all these places, but here at home. The founders never intended that we would have a national police force to monitor the actions of the American people, but they've been doing that for a long time. It's incrementally getting worse, and we should be alert to that. And
Yeah.
that's why this issue that I say people are getting open minded to, and if they accept these non aggressive principles, they say, well, how would you handle such and such? That would be the next step. But they have to get to the point where a non aggression is what we should, seek
Yeah.
and make sure that we opened our doors to voluntarism.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think we both agree very much on, peace. This was our recent issue with the Dalai Lama and people like that talked about peace being, there is no way to peace. Peace is the way, right? You can't create peace with more war. And
Right.
I agree with you about that very much. But what do you do in a situation where, let's say, for example, Putin is trying to push into Europe, trying to take over sovereign nations and things like that? What do you do in a situation like that? I mean, you can take it to the extreme of, for example, Hitler in World War II. What do you do? Do you just sit by and let them do it? If you were president in World War II, would you
Well,
just have
I
stayed
wouldn't
home?
I wouldn't compare it to Hitler. This is a
Mm.
different subject right now because we made promises to Russia that we would not through NATO and our own government that we would not be putting troops up and encroaching the neighboring territory around Russia. And they've been invaded so many times they knew they needed this. But we broke those promises, and I don't look at it and say, Russia, what are you going to do about Russia's invasion? Well, what are you going to do about NATO and the United States spending all the money to have a coup in 2014 and get rid of the president, the leader at that time that had a different opinion? So I would work on the education on who really started the war and accept the principle that I can't steal from you or anybody else to send weapons to either side, and that principle would stand. So if the neighborhood up there had to deal with this, I mean, do you think Europe should have enough concern if it's truly a threat to them? They should deal with that. Why should we go 5,000 miles and steal more money from our people to try to start something that's very impractical?
Yeah, well, I know you're saying that there was problems in Ukraine and NATO, and that's what caused the war. Others would say that Putin's sort of expansionism is really the core of it. There are so much disinformation from both sides. How do you know what's real, and how do you filter through all the noise and disinformation to see the truth?
Well, sometimes it's going to be difficult, but I think you can find out who initiates the war. I think right now, let's say there's a trade war going on right now, and you might say, well, China did this and that, but you might say maybe it's our policies, putting on sanctions and threats and militarism if they don't do exactly what we tell them. So I say we should get involved. And you say you may just let it be. I would say, well, if you want to pick sides in the Middle East or in Ukraine, go to it. It's all you're doing. But I think it should be the neighborhood up there dealing with it, and not us who's 5,000 miles away. So
Mm.
I would make sure that people could express themselves, but it's not an excuse for if I supported, say a faction in the Middle East to go to somebody, that is. Matter of fact, that argument is getting hotter than ever before, which is a surprise, because we've seen some atrocities in the Middle East. But guess whose money that is? It's the American people's money, and they haven't said much until recently. Now they're talking out because people are getting hurt. So I think the difficulties can be turned into positives if people will say, why are we having these difficulties? And lo and behold, there's an answer to it. Avoid doing the dumb things that we do to antagonize people and stir up trouble.
Yeah, thank you. I know you have to go in a moment. Do you have a time for one last question about the national debt, or do you have to go right now?
We'll do it quickly.
Okay, so national debt currently $37 trillion. We're paying $1 trillion of interest per year. Seems it's more than the GDP. It seems like it's impossible to pay this down. Do you still have hope that we will be able to do so, to pay down the national debt? And if so, how?
No, I don't have any hope at all. I think it's beyond that. But I have one thought about it. The debt will be liquidated. We can't do this. Economic law demands that it stop. And that law is starting to work because, people are worried about it and prices are going up. The inflation has continued. And people are talking about cutting back even on some war spending. So, but two things can happen when you get to this point. One is you could do what you suggest. Why don't we why don't we get a new president and a new Senate and a new Congress who's 80% all endorsing time to quit. Let's quit the spending. That's not going to happen because if you take a person like Thomas Massey, look at the grief he has to face. He's just one of a very few that's willing to vote against this. The special interests get the condition that they really, yes, we know we have to quit, but not on my program. So that is the big thing that we have to worry about. So I think that the other option, which I say is coming, and that is the debt can't be sustained because everybody's pointing out the interest rate now is we have to pay interest rates more than what's on going to the military, and both of them we shouldn't be doing it. So what's going to happen is you're going to have a big crash, and the debt will be liquidated by it being paid off with money have no value, and that's what they've done. Look, if you have $1 billion debt and you double the money supply, and you only owe $500 million in real value. So the debt will be liquidated, but that invites trouble. That invites a danger of war breaking out more serious than we have now. But I don't say, well, if we just get more congressmen in there, all of a sudden the budget is going to be balanced. I think I feel more strongly about that than ever after I saw what happened in the initial stages with our new president.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Dr. Paul. It's been an honor and a pleasure to talk to you. And I hope that you are successful in continuing to spread your message of liberty around the world, and that the world becomes a better place as we move forward into the future.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you so
Nice
much.
being with you.